So I just got a 3D printer, and I've been playing with that. And I wanted to design a part. Basically, I wanted to design like a clip that I could just slide onto like a storage bin. And there are databases of all kinds of stuff out there, and I looked around. I couldn't really find what I wanted, so I thought, well, I'll develop something. I'll see what AI can help me design for this part. So I basically went in and I described and went through a couple of iterations of a prompt, and I used the latest version of Nano Banana. So Nano Banana Pro, which is the latest image generator from Google, which is far and away the best one. It can do truly amazing things. Because it's more than an image generator, it also has it's got a full language model built into it, so it can do logical things as well. So I used that to develop this clip, and then I brought it into a piece of software, and I added a label to it, and I printed it, and it was exactly what I wanted. And I know nothing about, designing parts. But so you can see where, that kind of thing can be very easy. Now I did take some measurements and, did some basic stuff, but I'm not an engineer, so I don't know all the ins and outs of how that works, but I was able to make what I wanted, and it worked. So yeah, you can see where the world is changing in that regard, for sure.
I wonder right now, though, how we're probably at this point where, so a person who has the skills of running CAD programs and can do that design to then send to the 3D printer can do that pretty fast.
Yeah.
You didn't have that specialized knowledge, but you had the knowledge to prompt the AI software to be able to do what you needed for the 3D printer. I wonder at this point who could do it faster.
Right.
Just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Because, so the middle person in between who doesn't know about prompting and can't do CAD work is stuck. Right?
Yeah.
With stuff online and not getting what they really want.
Mm-hmm.
And this clip now has changed your life, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, all the CAD tools are just like everything else, right? They're getting AI built into them as well. So, in an effort to try to further my knowledge on it, I've started trying to learn Fusion 360, which is an Autodesk CAD piece of software to do, some basic design, and to actually create parts without AI. But knowing that the ability to use AI within the context of that app is coming at some point. It's not quite there yet, or at least not the version I pay for. So, but yeah, so there will be kind of that bridge in between for those that are like, oh, I want to start with this, but I don't know everything there is to know, so I'm going to use AI to help me, either with some aspect of learning the system or actually doing the design or some combination of those things.
Seems like that adaptability is a really great skill for the workplace right now.
Yeah.
To move between the different, be comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
Not one or the other.
And like we said, that prompting skill, the kind of those fundamentals of prompting are going to be just a standard that everyone kind of gets into at some point. Just like, as I've said, just like Google searching, it's, you kind of learn the basics of it, and some people go very deep in it and can do a lot more with Google, but in the same way, being able to do prompting and at various depths, to kind of do things. Well, okay, so we're going to talk about roadmaps today, and kind of taking everything that we've discussed so far and looking at how do we kind of wrap that up into a roadmap and set of documents that can help you kind of get started. And the idea is that next time, so next week is our last week together. I know, that's tragic. Um, but so for next week, what I want to do is just kind of have a time of being able to work on roadmaps and kind of share and discuss in more of, a little bit of unstructured time just to kind of work on these things and to share kind of what you've learned. And also at the end of next week, we also want to do just a debrief and like, okay, what did you like? What do we need to tweak just about this whole process? So that will be helpful as well. So be thinking about some of that stuff as we get for next time. But today we're going to talk about roadmaps. And so we've talked a little bit about AI news, but I'm curious if you had any Thanksgiving AI discussions with the family around the dinner table. Didn't come up as a topic?
Well, it wasn't Thanksgiving, but it was interesting. I was watching, I think, sports or something, and Meta had an ad about Altoona, Iowa, and how they were creating great jobs in Altoona, Iowa data center. And it was like someone talking about, Altoona was falling apart and we were low skilled, and then Meta came in with this state-of-the-art enterprise data center. I was like, oh my gosh, so like Meta is now going to communities or targeting communities to create more data centers. But the fact that they would use Altoona, Iowa, I don't even know where Altoona, Iowa is,
Yeah.
but I thought that was kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
Got a lot of communities who are embracing data centers.
Yeah.
Investment, and they kind of need to have it.
It's interesting because, reading the news, I hear both sides of it, right? So there are some communities that are really pushing back, and it's like, oh, we don't want this in our community. Kind of, even though it can bring jobs and all the other benefits. And there are other communities like maybe Altoona, Iowa, that's like, we love it. This is the greatest thing because of whatever their economic situation is in their area. So it seems like I'm hearing both sides of that in some respects. And I don't know if there's anything, if there's anything specific on either side and how accurate some of the information is.
Availability of electrical infrastructure, and that we won't be
Yeah.
able to power our homes or power other businesses because they'll come in and suck
Right.
it all up. So.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't have any, around my dinner table, we had a little bit of discussion around AI because my daughter's a TA at Northern, and so we were talking a little bit about some of her classes and, how she has to deal with AI from an education perspective, but no huge controversies necessarily, so.
Are all these data centers necessary? And what I'm reading more and more about is it's almost you will never be satisfied the demand for data centers, because as there's more data centers, AI expands to consume all of them. Is that what's happening?
There's a definite demand right now, for sure. And I think that's kind of the question of, is that demand going to continue to increase or plateau at some point? Because we know that the chips will keep getting better, so the capacity within a data center will theoretically improve over time or keep up with demand. But on the other hand, there's a lot of money being invested, and so it's like we have to spend this money. So we're going to spend this money and build out this infrastructure. And I think in some senses, it might be, there are probably some regional questions around, how that data is, or how that capacity is used locally, so to speak, or regionally, as opposed to outside of that region. Is it part of just a broader infrastructure, or is it, needed in a particular area?
But it's really also they've now switched over to issuing bonds to build data centers. So like Meta and some of the other companies that Jennifer mentioned are now in the bond market to sell debt to build data centers.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking about who ends up holding the bag at all. Who's holding this bag at the end of the story?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, those are good questions, and you know, we've talked about potential bubbles and, you know, all of that over our time together, and that, you know, continues to be a question, I think, of are we seeing some type of bubble or not, and if not, is it true growth and is it going to continue? I think, you know, that the whole kind of interconnection of all these companies, of one investing in another to invest back in the first one, and, you know, all of that is a little bit questionable in terms of sustainability.
The other one I wonder about is, okay, let's go down the road 5 years. If we were 5 years down the road looking back, where would we be in 5 years? And it's like this article I read this morning talking about the educational system in California, and by adopting AI as all in on AI, and how that's changing the educational system.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just using it as a tool, which is what we've always said, you know, it's just another tool. It's actually changing the fundamentals of things. And so it's
Yeah.
almost like the board is absorbing us.
Yeah, I think those systems that society depends on, or, you know, is that are integrated into our society, are certainly going to undergo change in some respect, and it might be significant, right? The way that we think about what a classroom is in 20 years, is it going to be the same, or are we going to see something different? Or, you know, the way that business is done, right, with agents and so forth. You know, how much are humans part of transactions that where we are today, right? It's part of our day-to-day lives, and how much is AI going to take over aspects of how we engage with the world on a day-to-day basis, in making decisions and communicating and you know, interacting with others and that type of thing. And is it truly where, you know, AI is going to take over the mundane things we don't want to do and leave the humans for the higher value activities, right? Who knows? But I think it will certainly look different in some amount of time. How different, we don't know.
And how soon we don't.
And how soon, we don't know, right? So when we talk about building a roadmap, part of what we have to keep in mind is, you know, with AI projects and many projects in general, being able to really capture the value can be a challenge. And so that's why being diligent about designing the roadmap and thinking about the strategy and thinking about the kind of mission, vision, values of what you're doing is important. So, you know, getting the full value can be a challenge. A lot of times proof of concepts are great, but then being able to scale those effectively is another challenge. And so what works at a small scale, or for a small data set, or for a specific example, can be, you know, may not work for every use case or everything that you may want it to. So being aware that of the scale issue, and it takes time, right? So it's not something necessarily that happens overnight, because you do want to go through a deliberate process of evaluating, trying something, evaluating, and then kind of getting to scale. Now, as smaller organizations, certainly there's advantages, right? The ability to be, you know, more agile, to change the culture and communicate well, and all of those things is helpful. So I think there are some advantages to that in implementing AI projects, but it isn't, I think we all know, it isn't guaranteed success, right? It isn't something like, hey, we're going to do this thing, and then magically it just works, and everyone is, you know, it's all it's all sunshine and rainbows, because that isn't necessarily the case. It can do great things, as we know, but it takes effort. If we go back through the kind of our past 8 weeks and looking at kind of the different pieces, so looking at, we have the reality check, kind of the initial understanding AI's capabilities. We talked about use cases and data, generative and machine learning AIs. And then we talked about governance related to, policies and change management and ethics kind of over our past 8 weeks. So as you think about each of those areas, it's understanding where are you as an organization at within each of those. So from a readiness perspective, we did the AI assessments and basic readiness score there. Thinking about the use cases, what is a potential ROI for those use cases? And again, the idea being, identifying and prioritizing the ones that can be the big hitters ultimately. The data, thinking about how mature is your data and what the condition of the data is, because again, that's, as we talked about, that's important to have that foundation to use to build some of these AI initiatives. So you have to kind of think about how mature your data is and where it's at and what work might need to be done there. Thinking about things like generative AI or machine learning opportunities, where do those fit into your process in some way? And maybe there's a combination, maybe it's one or the other. And then the more kind of culture and governance side of things, we know that we need to make sure that we're accounting for those activities. So do we have a governance framework? Do we have a good AI use policy and the right guide rails to put in place for people to use? And then what about the change? How ready is the organization for change? And being able to engage with these AI opportunities in an effective way. And what do we need to do to support that change? And then, as we talked last time on ethics, what are the guidelines and how are we thinking about appropriate use around each of these? So everything that we've covered previously kind of folds into this idea of a roadmap, because all of those things are going to be important in some respect, some more than others, depending upon how you're approaching, a given initiative. And so going back to the use cases, looking at your top 2 or 3 use cases and documenting what the value is for each of those. Some of it, might be harder to gauge in terms of what the ROI is for it, because it might be a little bit more nebulous in how you would calculate that. Largely, if we're talking about generative AI, there's going to be some type of time savings or efficiency gain because you're allowing the AI to do some level of work on your behalf, whether it's in an automated workflow or in creating content or something that would save you time, and putting some dollar amount on a per hour basis, to that to come up with whatever the savings is. But then there are also those challenges of, well, if I'm not doing the mundane work that AI can do for me, then accounting for the fact that you can do more and you can create higher value yourself and letting AI do some of that other work. So that's going to be part of what we have to do, thinking about those applications. Identifying, the data issues. So again, do you have good data or not? And is that a gap, right? Where are the gaps that we need to close with the data that is available? Maybe the data is incomplete, or maybe there are discrepancies in the data that need to be addressed. Identifying those as gaps so they can be part of the roadmap, because that has to be a step then to address those things. Understanding kind of that build versus buy decision. And I think that, from everything that we've talked about, right, it's more of it's going to be some combination, right? Because largely you're going to subscribe to services, you're kind of going to buy into language models or particular applications or platforms or whatever it might be. So you're going to get access to some type of initial capability with AI, and then you have to build something on top of it, right? So you're going to build out a workflow, or you're going to build out a set of prompts to create content, or you're going to, develop thinking about a machine learning structure and what are the things that might be appropriate to train a model, right? So all of that. Looking through kind of these technical realities and then identifying, okay, where do I need to maybe plug some holes for each of those? And then as we think about the governance side of it, do we have the policies created? What about the risk? Identifying, documenting what the risks are. How are we going to train the people that are going to use AI, both in terms of the technology itself, but also communicating guidelines and communicating the way and the appropriateness of how we're doing things. Mapping out stakeholders, as we've talked about. We've got the internal, we've got the external, whether it's customers, employees, leadership teams, the general public. So there's a lot of different stakeholders, and how does AI going to impact each of those areas? And then how are we defining success, right? So what are those metrics that we're going to use to say that this initiative was a successful initiative? It might be dollars and cents, it might be time saved. Figuring out what the appropriate metric is going to be, I think, is going to be important. And then ultimately, how are we communicating all of this, again, internally and externally? That, as we've said, how do we effectively say, we use AI, we're an AI organization, we believe in these technologies, and here is how we're implementing these things in an appropriate way, right? We hear this term responsible AI, which I think is a good term. I think it makes sense, and I think we're hearing it more and more. Organizations are saying we're a responsible AI organization. So what does that mean, and how do the ethics play into it? So defining that in a way and communicating that in a way that is complete and accurate is part of developing the roadmap and having that framework. So being able to clearly articulate, kind of in your own words, what AI can do, and this is part of that communication structure of being able to really convey the value of AI within the organization. So what can it do within your organization? What are the areas of opportunity in those use cases that are going to be most applicable? So you've got that list of opportunities. You understand the data, right? The quality of the data, the accessibility of the data. You've mapped out some gaps. You understand the build versus buy for the tools that need to be implemented, right? You've got the structures for making decisions. You've got a change management plan of how to implement these things, and you've got you got your ethics in line. All of those things need to have some level of documentation to them to be able to incorporate that into the roadmap, right? So you have to have some understanding of each of those things to be able to craft what that plan looks like and how to implement something going forward. So does that all make sense? So the question is, where are you at with these things? Do you feel like you have a reasonable grasp of those areas to be able to say, yes, we can craft a roadmap. We've got a way forward to be able to implement AI within the organization? Or are there gaps? And in which case, if there are gaps, those should be noted as risks. Maybe our data is incomplete, or there's some issue that we know that we need to address, so that needs to be incorporated as a risk within the plan so that it's understood. So if you had to write your roadmap this very second, could you do it? And if not, why not?
Well, the good thing is you have a framework, almost like a checklist, so you can get started.
Yeah.
And then, because you are going to run into things that you don't know, right? And it depends on the size of the organization too. So obviously, a small organization will be much easier than a larger one. Because a larger one, you're going to immediately run into people that are just resistant to the whole thing.
Right. Yeah. The good news is that I have built a tool for you.
Oh my goodness. Andy, you're just the gift that keeps on giving.
Right. Santa came early. We'll go into that later on today, but I did create a tool that's a bit in process, but it'll get you started, where what you can do is you can load in your assessment document and then walk through kind of a series of steps to help you kind of define your use cases, how much, what your budget might be for something like this, all of those things, and then to start getting a set of documents that will kind of get you going. But recognize that the tool doesn't answer all the questions. And you still need to be able to think about, each of these things when you're putting together your plan. When we think about building a plan, there are some kind of core patterns that we need to recognize and understand. So the first one is we want to start small, right? We're not going to boil the ocean with, a big, elaborate plan to implement AI. It's very targeted, very specific, identifying, so to speak, the low-hanging fruit, the easy things that you can start with, because those are largely things that the organization understands, and the amount of time and effort it takes to implement something in a very targeted way is a short amount of time. So starting small. We've talked about data quality, right? We got to have good data to work with. And if we don't, we need to address that first before we implement something, or we have to look at a different use case. We also know that change management is greater than technology. So in these kinds of projects, the technology is secondary to the people and managing the change of the organization. So we can do all kinds of things with technology, but if the organization and the people aren't on board with it, it's not going to go anywhere. We've talked about the governance kind of enabling speed, right? So it's where the brakes on your car allow you to go faster, as we said previously. We want to put those guardrails in place to let the organization move and make progress on AI with the appropriate structure in place. And the ethics goes along with that. So if we're building responsible and we're practices and we're transparent and we've got our statement, our ethical statement about this is how we believe AI, what AI can do for us, and this is how we're using it, then that's going to create trust both inside the organization and to the community. And those quick wins are going to create momentum, right? So we're going to be able to take the individual things that we're doing, if we can show some early and easy success with that, and then we can start building on that momentum, because it's going to make it easier and easier for people to understand what the value of AI is, and then we're going to be able to then broaden our scope and to attack more complicated AI types of projects ultimately. So you need to have a good organizational profile. And a lot of this, was part of your assessment, right? So thinking about, your sector, how big you are, right? Maturity of technology and change and those kinds of things. So those are kind of core aspects to a roadmap. So, we have that as part of our structure. Understanding what the constraints are. So if you have low capacity for change or low technology, again, that's going to potentially add some risk, and we need to, figure out how to address some of those things and what's the right way. So for a low maturity technology organization, that might mean that there has to be some additional training and education about, well, what is this technology and what does it do and how does it work? I think that's going to be an important aspect to understanding and setting up your profile. If your capacity for change is low, that's going to take more time, right? You've got to spend more time communicating, you've got to spend more time educating, and that's just going to extend your time frame ultimately. So where can we fail on this? Generally, we don't like to talk about failure, but we know it happens, and so we need to be aware of, where some of at least the more common ways that projects in general and certainly AI-based projects can fail, or at least not gain the traction that maybe you would want them to. The first one being you don't have a vision, right? The vision isn't clear, it's not communicated well, the team doesn't understand why we're doing this. That's mission, vision, values is going to be an important kind of threesome to understand and apply to a particular project. So that's part of our roadmap, is to define mission, vision, values for what we're doing. So we need to be able to communicate that clearly throughout the organization. So that's the first one. Second one is too many initiatives, right? So we don't want to have a bunch of really small initiatives because, oh, they're small, they're easy. We need to have focus. So it's picking one or two, right? It isn't picking 10 or casting too wide a net for what you're trying to do, because you want to build the momentum within the organization. So having those quick wins and focusing on a couple of core use cases, the ones that we've prioritized, that's going to be the best way to avoid failure in that sense. Being unrealistic with your timelines. So we all want things to be done quickly. We're kind of in this society of go, 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 and things have to be always moving, and we have to fix problems quickly and all of that. But if we're not realistic about how long it's going to take to actually try something, validate it, test the metrics, and move on to the next step, then that's kind of a recipe for failure, right? If the expectation is that we're going to solve this problem tomorrow and AI is the magic bullet, that's not serving anybody well. So being realistic with those timelines and being able from a leadership perspective to kind of set the appropriate expectations and stave off the people that are like, this has got to happen immediately, to set the right timeline expectation. Then the ignored change needs. Technology people are great at hey, we've got this great technology, we're going to implement something, and forgetting about what the actual business problem or the end user need is. So we need to have alignment between the technology and the problem that we're solving. And that's an easy one that kind of can get out of control. It's a very standard challenge with software and systems, where technology people go off in a corner and they build something and it's nowhere near what the business actually needs. And so we need to make sure there is that alignment, and that there's a good connection between what the technology is capable of doing and what the actual need is and what the problem is that we're solving. And then not having learning loops, right? So there's no feedback in that process where, hey, we implemented something and great, it's just out there. And we're not circling back to understand the value and is it actually useful for people and are we actually using it? All of those things. That needs to be part of the plan, being able to say, hey, we're going to spend some time reviewing what we've done and understand where things went well and where things did not go well and how we can improve on the next iteration. Because we know it's an iterative process. It's not something that just you put something in and it's done. It's going to be a process that you're going to revisit and improve on over time. So being able to account for that and build those learning loops into the overall road mapping process and the timeline, that's something you're going to want to do. So if you don't do these things, right, greater chance of failure. Doesn't mean if you do them, everything's going to be successful either, but we're trying to minimize the risk and try to minimize the potential for failure.
Something I don't see there is the importance of top-down,
Mm-hmm.
the buy-in,
Mm-hmm.
the leadership of the organization. I think that could be critical.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think, and I think it's both ways, right? So I think, like we've said, we need the top-down sponsorship, leadership, kind of endorsement of a project, but we also need the support of everyone within the organization, and we need good feedback mechanisms to be able to capture, what people are saying and how they're using it so that everyone can be informed. And those learning loops are kind of are enforced and leveraged to ensure that everyone's kind of understands what's going on. So I think you need to have both kind of the top down and the bottom up. But that's a good point to include that.
I know I'm glad to see Jennifer here too, because that's important, and then with Rebecca, you've got that,
Mm-hmm.
that loop.
Mm-hmm.
The learning loop is here.
Right. Yeah. And we know that, some organizations, every organization has a different culture. And so the ability to communicate well and for employees to understand what's going on, it's going to be easier for some than others. But I think ultimately it is casting that vision. So this is, hey, we're doing this thing and this is why we're doing it. Understanding that the why is important, because otherwise people they're gonna make assumptions, and they're not, some are willing to buy in, and this is across every organization. Some people are willing to buy in and they're like, I want to try it. I love AI. This is great. And you've got the people that are I want nothing to do with this. And so there's the question of, for the people that want nothing to do with it, how do you engage them in a way that is meaningful and supportive to the organization without creating a situation where they're outright, rejecting and, they're trying to blow up the whole thing because they don't like what's going on. And we know that just the way humans are, we're gonna have that spectrum of people that we have to kind of deal with. And that's not only within our organizations, but people we talk to on a day-to-day basis, right? We know there are people that we talk about AI to, and they're like, "Oh, this is great. This is awesome. I use it all the time." And other people are like, "I want nothing to do with it." Right? You're gonna bring me kicking and screaming into this new technology, but I'm not going willingly.
It's called retirement.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like I said before, when I was in St. Louis and my cousin was in IT, and we spent some time talking about AI, and he had no clue. He spent his whole career in IT and he retired like 3 years ago, and hasn't been part of his day-to-day life whatsoever. And he was always a tech guy, so it's not necessarily accepted everywhere or understood everywhere by any means. So essentially what we're doing now is we're saying, well, what will we actually use AI for? We've talked a lot about what we could use AI for, right? So we spent a lot of time looking at examples and options and talking about different ways of thinking about how, technologies that can be used. So it's been very kind of pie in the sky. This is great stuff we can use, but now we have to kind of get to the point of, what does this really look like for this organization? How do we go from the conceptual to the actual? And it's, some people are great at that. Other people have, again, it's a challenge. Going from, I can vision all day long of what would be great, but then actually trying to get it into a structured, okay, we're going to do step 1, and then we're going to do step 2, and then step 3. That's hard for some people to kind of make that transition and translate it from kind of one mindset to the other. And so that's our challenge now, is to actually take all of this learning and all of these ideas and start formulating what actually goes into a document, a roadmap, a set of documents that that kind of define what it is that that we're going to be doing. And we will do that after the break. All right, so we're going to talk about kind of first this strategy architecture, mission, vision, values. So kind of starting with vision, where we're going, right? We want to be able to define within the context of an AI project, kind of what does the future look like? And this could be, you could go really long term, right? If you want to go 3 to 5 years, you could start with, what the next 6 months looks like, and then what does the next year look like? But you want to set, enough of a vision so the organization understands that, this is something that is a long-term thing, and we're going to live into what this technology can bring to us. So the vision there is, where we're going. Mission, of course, then is how we're going to get there. And that, this kind of goes into the roadmap. So we're developing a roadmap. We have these, we're going to take these steps to get from where we're at today to where we think this vision is over the course of time. And then the values of what guides our decisions. We've talked about the kind of the ethics of AI, but this also goes towards the values of the organization. And most organizations, right, they have these things already from a broad perspective. So some of the language and some of the ideas certainly can translate down into when we're thinking about AI as implementing a project or implementing an initiative like this. But I think it's important to have that mission, vision, values defined up front as part of the roadmap, because you're going to be communicating these things. Because that gives direction, right? It provides some coherence and some structure to what this project is. We know that it kind of keeps people all going in the same direction. If you can point back to the vision, especially as you're doing something and going through the implementation process, being able to say, this is how this particular activity that we're working on aligns back to, the vision of what we're trying to do. And this is how it fits into, the mission of, how we're going to get there. This is our process. So it provides clarity. And I think that's certainly with these kinds of new technologies, the more clarity you have, the better off the organization and the stakeholders will be for it. So the idea is when you're creating your vision for this initiative, language like, by some time frame, we will do this through AI to impact some aspect of the business. So language like that. So examples, by 2027, we'll become the most responsive nonprofit in our sector through AI-powered engagement tools that will reduce response time. Or by 2028, we're going to reduce operational costs by 40% through automation while improving customer satisfaction. Those kinds of things. They need to be short and simple and easily understood. So that's part of what we want to do for this roadmap, is develop what this vision statement is. So that's something to kind of think about. You can make some notes as we're going along here. We probably won't stop for 5 minutes to actually do it, but make sure that you're thinking about your vision statement for this. Well, what does the mission statement look like? We will have certain capabilities for a set of stakeholders by doing these things to achieve some type of value. So what kind of capabilities? Well, it might be we're going to, in these examples, deploy conversational AI, or we're going to implement predictive analytics, or we're going to automate a process, automate some responses. So what are the AI capabilities that we're going to actually implement? Who is going to benefit from that, whatever that process is? So it might be, customers, it might be staff, it might be, the broader community, whatever that constituency is. How it's going to happen, right? So we're gonna iterate through a process. We're focusing on a partnership with a team or with an outside group. We're using human-centered design. How is the implementation going to flow? And then what are we doing, right? Where does that value come in? And that can reflect back to some of our visioning. We want to improve service quality. We want to be more efficient. We're going to make better decisions. And recognizing that, we may have multiple of these missions that are going to align back to our vision. So it might be that we say, we're focusing on maybe a couple aspects of AI, a couple of specific core capabilities that might benefit a couple of different constituencies, and that's going to be what we're focused on. Now, it doesn't mean that when we talk about these kinds of things that it's, this is fixed, you do it once and that's all it is, right? These are designed to be something that you're revisiting and evaluating and not setting in stone necessarily. You want to be able to say, for a period of time, this is what we're doing, but we know that, especially with these technologies, that AI is very fluid, and the capabilities are going to drive, maybe some other decisions that need to be made, or maybe updates or tweaks to the vision or to the mission of how we're actually going to be doing something. But having those statements in a way that you can communicate is going to be helpful to get everyone going in the same direction and to provide the clarity that's needed for these kinds of initiatives. So, what kind of missions do you think you would think about for your organizations?
You're asking for
Yeah.
examples?
Yeah.
I crafted this really quickly because I know there's parts of it that probably aren't right. That we will automate the credit card expense submission process for our staff by an AI pattern recognition machine learning app to free up the staff for more time in ministry.
That's great. That's a great example. Yeah.
I've got one, which is implement predictive analytic process to predict corporate behavior.
Another good one.
I'm thinking of something related to implementing a scheduling tool to allow staff to easily schedule external meetings with, still maintaining their flexibility. I mean, we have not put an AI scheduling tool in place because people, frankly, want to have their calendars always up to date, but our other guide reels, we can put
Right.
that in place to allow that to happen.
Yeah. There's that human aspect of of the whole thing. If people weren't involved, this would be a lot easier. Yeah, those are great examples, and I think it's, you want to be specific like that, specific enough to be able to define what the process is going to be to get there without being something so nebulous that we're going to use AI to, fix everything in our organization. That doesn't do us any good. That might be what we want to happen, but I like the specificity of those things. Well, what about the value side of it? Some of these might resonate with you more than others. They might all resonate with you because they're all, in some respect, important, right? So transparency, being human-centered, right? We're using AI to help us as humans, not replace our judgment or replace us in some way. Privacy is important. We believe in innovation with guardrails, right? We want to build systems that are reliable, and especially when we're talking about AI, we want to build systems that if there are issues with what AI is saying or coming back with, right, we have the process for that critical thinking and critical evaluation of what the output is, and we can make the appropriate adjustments, right? We're going to be inclusive, right? We're serving everyone equitably. We're creating efficiency. We're maintaining accountability. Learning focused. We're ethical. So, again, these are all great things, and probably if you have a values statement for the organization, you're referencing some of these already. So again, it might be something that you say, well, we're gonna kind of just bring over the values statement that we already use, and we're applying that to this as well. There may be some things that are specific to AI that maybe we haven't included as part of our organizational values, and so we want to make sure that we're accounting for those. My question to you is, are there other aspects of values that are not listed here that you think would be important to consider for AI specifically?
I would think something along the line of integrity. I don't know if that's included in one of the other values, but what I'm thinking of is that what you're doing, whether you're using AI or not, it's transparent. Maybe that's up there. That
Yeah.
you know that you're not using it in a way that's misrepresenting yourself
Mm-hmm.
or replacing yourself in a way that people don't know it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something about the implicit commitment that I think this is a bigger deal in ministry. Maybe, I don't know if it is or not, but where there's an expectation of what the arrangement is.
Right.
Who you are and what you'll be doing
Right.
and won't be doing.
What's your relationship to AI
Yeah.
in your day-to-day?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that's so that certainly could be. I mean, bringing forward integrity as a separate term certainly makes sense. I think, we could say, oh yeah, there's elements of transparency and human-centeredness and ethics and so forth that kind of all go into integrity as a concept. But I think that, having that as a specifically called out term, I think is, certainly reasonable here too.
Along the same lines, I think the element of trust, I can see it in some of these, but it's almost so important.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to the integrity of the
Right.
Can we trust this?
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that,
Build trust.
yeah, and that's certainly a core concept of AI in general. Is how do we build trust in AI? Part of that is trust of what AI is giving us. So we're providing an input and it's providing an output. We've created some kind of prompt, right? We've tried to guide it, and it's given us something. But can we trust what it's provided? Well, we said that it might be right, it might be directionally correct, it might be completely correct, but we don't necessarily know for sure unless we're doing some level of validation against that. And we say, well, theoretically, over time, the models get better and better, the training is better and better, and what it delivers becomes more trustworthy, especially as we're evaluating it. And at some point, if we as humans are looking at something and saying, yeah, for the last, X amount of time, I've validated what it's given me and it's been correct every time. It's been what I would have done. And so it's built trust up, and now I can do things with it in a way that maybe I wouldn't have trusted previously, right? I can maybe not validate as much. Okay. There's that level of trust. But there's also the level of trust of, there's the trust of the person that's engaging with AI, and there's the trust of the person that is impacted by AI. And so from Chris taking the ministry example, right? If someone's using AI to generate content, that content might be correct in terms of what the output is. But if that use of that wasn't disclosed, does that person trust organizationally what the organization is doing or producing, right? So I think that those are all great terms to include.
Yeah, I like what you said about like always validate. And I know you have here like you're never hiding behind algorithms, but I think that's important to always validate the information and ensure I like the human centered too, to ensure that it is correct.
Right.
Especially when it's critical.
Yeah, and I think that I've said it before that we're in this period of time now where we inherently don't trust what AI is giving us, at least in general, right? Some people more than others. But we also know that over time, we will start implicitly trusting it more and more and more, to the point where generally as a society, it's just whatever it tells us, that's what we're going to take. And so we have to keep our critical thinking muscles built and flexing at as much as possible, and encouraging others to do the same, because we don't want to lose that ability to evaluate the way that we're approaching AI. So we need to make sure that the strategy that we're employing here is in alignment. We want to make sure that we're aligned with the organizational kind of mission, vision, values as well. So borrowing language, or making sure that there's a connection between what we're doing with AI and more broadly how the organization is defining its mission and vision and values. We don't want to make those opposed in some way, right? We need to create alignment with that. So typically using similar language or terms is a good way to do that. Making sure that the vision and the vision of what we're doing for AI is connected both to the organizational mission as well as the organizational vision. So all of those things need to be connected in some way. Kind of this question of, does each initiative advance the AI vision? So we need to kind of be thinking about, as we're developing this idea for how we're going to use AI, really being critical about, okay, is this aligning with what we're trying to do ultimately, or is there some disconnect there? Could the initiatives exist without a clear strategic connection? So, do we need that connection? I would argue that you do. that you always want to be able to tie back every initiative to your strategy, either broadly as an organization or very specifically to AI. Because that just makes it so much easier to communicate what's going on. If you're not in alignment, right, that creates a distraction ultimately. And so spending time on that I think is important up front as you're defining getting this roadmap in place, making sure that the strategies organizationally and with AI are connected. So we've got this mission, vision, values of kind of the AI strategy. So we're going to talk about this scale framework that provides kind of this structure for turning the strategy into execution. So you should have, an idea of mission, vision, values, and kind of what the specific initiatives are at a high level. And now, we're going to create this bridge with this scale framework. And scale is about strategic alignment. It's about capability assessment, prioritizing your actions, planning a launch, and then evolving the strategy. So we're going to talk about kind of each one of these. And the idea is that we're going to take each of the kind of initiatives and run them through these different aspects of an implementation. So the first one is this strategic alignment. And the idea here is that you're going to rate your initiatives. So you've got your kind of ideas for initiatives, and you're going to rate them on a scale of 1 to 5. There's an aspect of value creation, right? How much value is this initiative creating? Thinking about it from different perspectives, whether it's, you're growing revenue, you're reducing cost, you're reducing risk, you're creating efficiency, where's the value? Then what's the impact to stakeholders? So again, when we're thinking about an initiative, we're thinking about the initiative as it relates to a specific group of stakeholders. So we're going to impact our internal staff with better scheduling, right? Those kinds of things. So what is the broad stakeholder impact? Looking at it, how many people benefit? What is the significance of that impact? Again, on a 1 to 5 scale. Thinking about it from a strategic fit, so going back to the vision, how well does this initiative that you're thinking about align to that broader vision of how we're implementing AI? Advancing the vision and both from an AI perspective and the organizational mission, again, that alignment. And then what is the timeline for something like this? Is it a quick hit? Is it something that can show value immediately, or is it a longer term type of initiative? So looking at kind of a scoring of what your strategic alignment is going to be for a particular initiative. So you're going to have a score out of 20. And really those that are scoring below 12 should be reconsidered, right? They're not elevating enough to the point where they're going to create enough value, or there's going to be enough there's enough to that particular initiative to warrant really focusing on it. Those that are scoring over 15 are great candidates for what it is that you want to implement something in a pilot. And you have to be, again, you need to be very critical about evaluating each of these areas. Because if if they're all 10s, they're all 5s, they're all high numbers, right? It's like, well, okay. Is that accurate, or not? So you have to be realistic about each of those. So that's the first step. Then it's looking at kind of the capability. So we did some of this right initially as part of our initial assessment process. Now that you have some more background, we're kind of digging into this again, thinking about some of the different aspects that we've talked through. So data quality, right? So within the data quality, again, scoring on a 1 to 5, what is your perception of your current data quality and what the quality is that you think you would like to have, right? So if you have a clean database of of information, contacts, names, whatever the data is, doesn't require any kind of manipulation to be cleaned up in any way. There's no missing data. There's no format issues, all of that. And that's critical to what it is that you're trying to do with whatever this initiative is. Great, you've got maybe a 4 out of 5, and that certainly meets your required. Maybe required is you only need to have 3 or 4, right? Depends on the initiative that you're dealing with. So great, your data quality is of a high enough value. Same thing with technical infrastructure. Now, with smaller organizations, like we said, a lot of it's cloud-based. So you're subscribing to some service, whether it's an AI platform or some service to deliver functionality, Microsoft platform, whatever it is. Again, what do you have and what's required? If you're dealing with a cloud infrastructure of some kind, that's pretty easily updated and tweaked. So, I need more capacity. Great, I can easily add that. Or I need a new feature or function that I can get from subscribing to a new service within Azure or AWS or whatever it might be. So you can more easily manipulate the technical infrastructure. It's harder when you're dealing with on-premise types of things because I've got to build a new system or a new server or whatever it is, right? So that adds complexity. Budget, of course, is going to be key to all this, and your budget, as we'll see here in a bit, is going to fall into a variety of different categories. This is just kind of high level of saying, okay, are we allocating funds? First of all, are we willing to allocate funds? And second, have we allocated funds from a budgetary perspective to support an initiative? And what does that kind of look like? If we believe that, even without necessarily specific numbers at this point, we're saying, yeah, this is something we believe in, this is something we're allocating money to, we're allocating resources to, then that capability is something that we've addressed as part of identifying, the ability for this to be implemented. Same thing with AI skills. Everyone here is kind of building your capabilities with AI because you don't have anyone on staff that's the AI, your chief AI officer, right? You're that person. So because you've got a significant amount of knowledge, and hopefully that continues to grow. So you're building skills, and how do you? That's right. 5 out of 5. But if you feel like you have to augment that in some way, well, how do you do that, right? Are there other staff that you can bring in to help you? Do you bring people in from the outside? Whatever it is, right? To kind of understand, to implement whatever it is whatever the initiative is, do you have the ability to source that skill set in some way, internally or externally? We've talked a lot about governance. So, do we have the policies in place, right? Have we thought about the ethical statements and what the use policies are and all of that? where are we at right now, and what's going to be required. Now, some of these things might change over time, right? So we might say, oh, with governance, to get started, maybe we need a 3. We want to get to a 5, but maybe we can start with a 3 in terms of where we want to be. And maybe that's sufficient for what we're trying to do. But that also has to be part of the plan to say we're going to evolve our governance and we're going to evolve how we think about what it means to implement AI ultimately, because it can be a bit of a moving target for sure. And then the change, right? How comfortable are we with our ability to affect change and implement these kinds of things that can be disruptive? How prepared are we for being able to communicate well and share things like the mission, vision, values, and what the value of this particular initiative is and what it means to use AI, all of those things. So the key here is to identify the gaps, right? So if you've got a 2-point gap or more between where you are currently and what's required for what you want to do, then that's something that requires attention. You're going to have to think about how we're going to close that gap in some way. Some of these are going to be more important than others depending upon what it is that you're doing, right? So data is more important for machine learning. As an example, if you don't have really good data and you're trying to build a machine learning initiative, then maybe that shouldn't be the first thing you start with because you've got to do a bunch of work on your data. So trying to get a sense of, okay, where are we at with each of these kind of core areas of capability? That's going to help, again, prioritize what the ultimate starting point is going to be. When we think about then closing some of these gaps where we've got something of significance between where we are and where we want to be, then how do we address that, right? Well, one way is we're gonna do more work internally to try to figure out how we close that gap. That might be, as I mentioned with the data side of things, hey, we have to dedicate some time to go through our data and make sure that it's clean and that it's appropriate and ready for whatever it is we're going to use it for. Now, as we've seen in some of our exercises, AI can be very helpful with this. AI can help us clean the data, identify what needs to be fixed, and very quickly get to a point of, okay, we have a plan in place that we know where we need to go to try to get our data at a point where it's usable and good. So AI can be very helpful with that. But again, you have to kind of know where to start. You have to kind of know how to do some of those things. You could also, that could be we're going to outsource that, right? We don't have enough expertise. We need help. We have to figure out a way, because we believe in what AI can do, but we have some gaps in these areas, so we need help with X, whatever it is. And bring in some additional help in some way. That could be, we're going to subscribe to another service to help us, we're going to bring in some consultants, we're going to hire some people, whatever it is. But of course that all means there's additional cost. So that has to be factored into the overall plan of, okay, we've identified these gaps, now we have to close them before we're going to move on and actually do some kind of implementation. You could also partner strategically. So, that might be, hey, there's another organization that I know of that has great expertise. How can we create a partnership relationship that helps, where we help one another with maybe some of these things? Or you can just accept the gap. We can say, this is a gap, we understand it's here, and we're gonna.
No, that makes me nervous. That makes you more risky.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to decide, right, what's the right strategy for you to close that gap. Now, that depends on your appetite for risk, right? Some organizations are more willing than others, depending upon what area of gap there is, to say, we're willing to accept the gap, right? If we're talking about data, maybe the data team says, we don't accept gaps, right? But it might be that there may be some other aspect of where a gap exists of maybe AI skills where we say, oh, okay, we know there's a gap in skill set. We don't have the ability to resource that the way we would want to right now. We believe that we can overcome the majority of the risk with leveraging AI in a different way. We're willing to accept that. So for each of those areas where there is a gap, figuring out, okay, how do we address that? Internally, externally, a partnership, accept it, whatever that strategy is going to be. And then we want to prioritize the action. So we've said, okay, here's how we're thinking about bridging the strategy. Now, we've got a lot of different things that can kind of vie for our attention. And it seems like, yes, it's obvious. Those initiatives that are high impact but low effort are great starting points, right? We can hit that low-hanging fruit. We can do some very powerful things, but it doesn't take a long time because we want to build the momentum. So those quick wins, high impact, low effort. The strategic initiatives, those that are going to take longer, right? We know those are going to be high impact, but likely they're going to take some amount of greater time, right? It could be, and greater time is going to be relative. Greater time could be a month or it could be a year. It just depends on how ambitious you're trying to be, how much change you're trying to affect, and the systems and the people that are involved. The low impact, low effort, right? Those are ones that I think you can work on, but those are areas that aren't prioritized. And then we want to avoid the low impact, high effort. So organizing, right? So where do those initiatives fit into? Which category do they fit into? Can we start with the quick wins, knowing that we're gonna likely have some longer term strategic initiatives, and we're gonna have some activities that we might need to fill in here and there. Okay. So how do we select a pilot? What are the characteristics of a good pilot? Well, we'll take this first approach. So is it feasible? Is it impactful? Is it repeatable? Is it safe? And is it tangible? So when we're talking about feasibility, can we complete it in 90 days? Now, 90 days might be a lot. Maybe you want to target 60 days or 30 days, right? But defining a specific time frame. And in order to do that, we have to say, okay, well, have we defined the requirements in a clear way? Right? It needs to be clear and bounded. You have to put a box around it, otherwise it's going to grow uncontrollably. Well, what if we just did this, or what if we added this? And so we can get the scope creep that's going to push things out. That can happen very easily. Second thing is the technical solution is proven or it's low risk. So hey, we're using a process, an AI tool, a platform, a process that is known to work. There are lots of examples of it. It's being used regularly. We're not the first ones. We're not pioneering something here. We're using something that is proven. The dependencies are minimal. So it doesn't require a lot of extra stuff to implement, right? It might just be, hey, we're going to use ChatGPT to generate content in this way, right? We have a tool that's proven, right? ChatGPT works, assuming you're evaluating the output appropriately, right? There aren't any dependencies. It's just that tool, right? There aren't extra things that we're dealing with. And team members can commit necessary time, right? So again, you have to make sure that all the resources are aligned in a way that, okay, we're making time for people to use this tool. We're making time for this to be an initiative, and it isn't something that's like, hey, when you have an extra minute, go do this, right? It's, hey, we want you to spend 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, whatever the time frame is, dedicated to whatever this initiative might be. So can we complete it, right? That's the first kind of filter. Then is it impactful, right? Is there clear measurable value? So you define what the value is. Do you believe that that value is achievable? What about the metrics, right? Do we have good metrics that are measuring? So we have to be able to determine whether or not it's impactful. We have to have some way of measuring impact and understanding what the appropriate metrics are. So are they specific and are they quantifiable? And then is the value visible to the stakeholders who matter? So again, we're focused at initiative on a set of stakeholders, and will those stakeholders actually get value? Are they going to see something out of this initiative? So that's important too. The impact has to justify whatever the investment is. So if we're going to invest in software, if we're going to spend time training, if we're going to spend time dedicated to focusing on an initiative where we're allocating the resources, does the impact justify that investment of whatever the time and the dollars are? And then ultimately then, those results, whatever it is, right, we're talking about creating momentum. So if we're starting with the quick wins, we can create momentum to continue on to the next initiative. So does what we're talking about, right, this initial implementation of AI, does it meet those criteria, right? And then is it repeatable? So it's great we can use AI to do something, but to be valuable, it needs to be repeatable, right? Especially if we're going to be we want to leverage this across our organization. So if we take the example of, hey, we want to create a scheduling solution for people and leveraging AI to help us, manage our schedules, assuming the people part works and people are putting in the data right, Can we leverage that starting with a small group and extending it and scaling it to the rest of the organization? Does it apply to all of the use cases? Have we identified all the different use cases for that particular initiative? We're building organizational competence in this process, so we're learning and we're understanding how AI is being used. We're able to document that and communicate that. And then ideally, what we're getting out of that is, in this example, the team is understanding how AI can be used to help with scheduling. Then how does that transfer to other aspects of their day-to-day? And the more familiar that the team becomes with what AI can do and what the capabilities are and having tangible examples that work, then it's going to be much easier to then transition them into, here are other things that we're going to be using AI for. Right? If the quick win isn't a quick win and it creates problems and there's pushback, then there's no momentum trying to get into the next one, right? Now you've got to start over and figure out, okay, now I've got to figure out a different way to try to get AI implemented. And, what did we learn from the first one that didn't work well, right? Is it safe? So we don't want it to break anything, right? We have stuff that's going on day to day. We have process. We have organizations they're running all the time. And so we don't want to introduce a process that's going to create a problem. We don't want to introduce failure. We're not designing we're not designing failure here. We don't want to harm customers, employees, et cetera. So we need a way to make sure that there's a fail back. So if there's a problem with AI, we're able to address that process in some other way. So that's part of designing for the process. It's saying, okay, well, if things don't work, we hope everything works great, right? We're going to leverage this tool. It's great. It's going to do exactly what we want. But we also know that we're probably going to have problems. And so we're going to plan for that up front. And if we know if there's some kind of issue, it could be as simple as ChatGPT or the language model is down, right? Like the internet's having a problem and we can't use the technology because we're using the cloud. And if the cloud isn't working, then what do we do, right? How do we address that? That's a simple, not even a failure of AI. It's just failure of the delivery model, right? How do we address that? But then also there's the failure of the AI. Oh, it's scheduling things in the wrong way, or it's not taking into consideration the right things, or it's giving me content back that's wrong. How am I addressing that and adjusting for it? Not to say that the first wrong answer means we're done. It means, okay, how do we make sure that we're accounting for the fact that we know things are going to have to be tweaked and adjusted, and we're building that into the process, right? And then back to the outcomes. Is this a tangible and measurable outcome, right? We're capturing metrics. We're identifying what success is versus failure. And we're able to calculate whatever the ROI is. Again, we're looking at, maybe it's dollars of time saved, looking at, people's work and how they're doing things. Maybe it's increase in sales, assuming the sales guys know how to deal with marketing, all that kind of stuff. So we want to kind of look at these initiatives, running it through the filter. And if we're getting a no on one of these, then that initiative might not be a good one to consider, right? Because we need to look at something about that initiative, and we want to get to a yes for all of these, right? It's feasible, it's impactful, it's repeatable, it's safe, and it's tangible. Okay. So one of the things that we want to build here as part of the roadmap is this idea of a charter, which is really starting to kind of put into a structure what this project actually is. So we give it a name, right? We have to have a sponsor. So who is going to be the executive sponsor, the leadership sponsor of what this initiative is? We're going to describe what is the problem, what is the business problem that we're trying to solve, right? We happen to be applying AI as a technology, but that doesn't really matter. What we need to do is define what it is that we're trying to solve. What is the issue? We need to define what does success look like. How are we measuring this to say this was successful? Now, this could be a dollar amount of additional revenue. It could be an amount of time savings in aggregate. It could be a whole bunch of different things, right? But it needs to be tangible. It needs to be measurable. And it needs to be measurable in a consistent way, right? So if we're asking people to do things because we're trying to create a more efficient process, we need to be able to effectively capture our progress with that. Now, sometimes that can be systemic, right? There can be ways of measuring that through systems. That might also be through feedback and conversation. So part of it is going to be, okay, we're going to meet on a regular basis every week. We want to have a 30 minutes to just have a quick meeting and understand how we're doing with AI, and use that time to capture some information, to capture some metrics. But we want to define what those are. We have to define a budget, right? How much are we going to spend on this initiative with all the different pieces? Typically, that's going to be technology of some kind. There's a bucket of technology, and then there's a bucket of people. And how are we going to break those down in a way where we feel like, yes, we can allocate dollars to whatever this initiative is? We need to define the timeline, right? So is it going to be we're going to shoot for 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, whatever the time frame is to implement something. Again, we want to keep this relatively short to have that quick win initially. And then we want to define what the risks are. So going back to our conversations of use case and where are the different risks that might be involved here, because as we just said, it might be we don't have the technology, we don't have the skill set, the data isn't good. Whatever the risk is, where there might be a gap we need to address, what is that? What are those top 3 risks? And then who's the team, right? We have to make sure that we're defining the appropriate communication and the appropriate connection of the team. So we want to create this template. Now, when we talk about resources, as I said, we're talking about, typically we're dealing with people and technology and maybe some other stuff, training and so forth. Here's some examples that you would want to consider. So there's some aspect of, okay, in this example, 1.5 FTE over 3 months. What does that look like? Well, how does that break down? In this case, this is an organization that might have multiple people, a larger team that's involved. The executive sponsor is putting some amount of time into it. So if you're the sponsor, recognize that some of your time is involved in managing this project in some respect, right? It could be communication, it could be just general oversight, you're going to go to some meetings, whatever it might be, right? But don't forget to account for your own time. There might be then a lead person, right? Okay, this is the person that's going to focus their time on leading this project, right? It also could be you. So, you could be wearing multiple hats here, and recognizing that you're going to have some percentage of your time that might be split between different activities, right? So you're going to have the sponsor, you're going to have a lead person, there's going to be some kind of subject matter expert, right? Whoever is within the organization that knows about whatever the process is, whatever the part of the organization is that is being impacted by AI, who knows what the business problem is and can articulate that effectively. They're going to be able to provide that domain knowledge and understanding of what the requirements are. Now, the technical lead, again, that could be someone on the team who is specifically a technology person that wears that hat all the time. Again, it could be you because you know the most about AI in this particular setting, and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, I'm trying to solve this problem with my AI hat on. And what does that look like, right? Okay, so there's some amount of time related to the technology and implementing the technology. And then there's the change part of it, right? We know it's not just technology, it's how the organization is dealing with change. So we have to allocate some time for managing change. And a lot of that is communication, there's meetings, there's, that ability to make sure that the organization is not going to be negatively impacted by whatever this initiative is. So we're accounting for the fact that we have to communicate and we have to address this issue of change management, ultimately, right? So there are some different buckets here. And ideally what you're doing is when you're thinking about your budget and you're saying, okay, here are all the different pieces that I need to account for, even if the vast majority of it is just you, then recognize what that means to your day-to-day and what that means for the other stuff that you do, because you're not just doing this, right? And then where might you need help in some respect? Now, over time, what we know is as you start sharing the capabilities and the organization understands what AI can do better and better and people are excited about it, they'll want to be, more involved in these kinds of things and they'll want to, be part of these projects. So you can start allocating, okay, we need help with this, we need help with this. But all of these areas need to be accounted for, right?
Andy, going back to the FTE, if there's, let's just say 40 hours in a week, 160 hours in a month, 1.5 means you're going to be spending about 240 hours as a company on this. Is that the conversion from FTE to hours, total hours?
In this example, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
That's a big commitment because if you think of what your hourly rate is, like your billable rate per employee, that gets really expensive.
right, yeah, and that's why
Oh yeah, that would be my call her back.
that's right.
You're going to be the lead on our AI initiative.
I think that's the key though is recognizing that it isn't it takes an investment, right? That you're making an investment in time, primarily time, right? Because the tools, right? If you have a $20 a month ChatGPT account and that's your tool, okay, well my technology expense is relatively low, right? And of course you could have all kinds of tools if you want to. It's really about investing the time and setting and being deliberate and intentional about saying, okay, we're gonna use these tools to solve this business problem over the course of X amount of months, right? This could be, we're gonna spend, all we can spend is half an FTE for 1 month, let's say. Okay, well, all of these things still need to happen, right? I mean, you still need to be able to have the subject matter expert spending time, and there's some aspect of technical lead, right? You're doing some prompting or whatever the engagement is, right? You have to deal with change, right? You're communicating. Some of this might be part of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis anyway, so it might be kind of a gray area in terms of how it, how what you're doing with AI is really part of what you're doing anyway, so it's not necessarily a separate allocation of time. But I think you have to recognize that the roles of these are part of the process, and be deliberate about implementing and interacting with those roles in some way.
Let's jump back to risk just for a moment. Going back to your opening comment that capture the value of the roadmap only happens 8% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was thinking pilots never scale 70% of the time. So if you look at the opportunity cost of peer times the risk factor, it's no wonder people don't do it.
And I think it's one of these things where, again, we're early days, right? So what it takes today to do something like this is, like I said, AI is the worst it's ever going to be right now. well, it's also the hardest it's ever going to be to implement right now. And I think over time, it will become easier because more people will understand it, and it will be more integrated into kind of the day-to-day process, and it won't be necessarily a one-off thing. So I think that those numbers, the success numbers will increase, right? The scale numbers will increase. I think it's just low right now because of the amount of effort it takes, right, to understand it to the point of how do you really get your arms around it to make it an effective implementation. But it also goes back to the fact that a lot of what we've talked about it's not necessarily just AI, right? So all projects deal with this kind of stuff, right? You have to deal with change management. You have to deal with allocating resources for people and technology and all the different things, right? So we're talking about AI specifically, and I think that's where I don't know necessarily what the numbers are more generally outside of AI in terms of implementing a project and not being successful or having trouble scaling. But I think that those numbers will improve over the next 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, kind of a thing. Yeah, I think it's just going to take some time to get there. But I think we have to recognize that there is an investment, right? It's not something that just happens. And I think that it's harder for those organizations that haven't done anything whatsoever to get into it. So I think that there's a spectrum of organizations that are like, oh, we have a team, we have people, we have an understanding, we've done a lot of projects, we understand how projects work, so they're going to be much more successful. If you're just getting into this and you're like, hey, I want to use AI, but I know nothing about AI, I know nothing about project management, I know nothing about implementing technology. So those things are going to draw your numbers down as well. So there's kind of this foundational knowledge of, well, how do I deal with AI? That's kind of one whole bucket of information and knowledge. And then it's, well, how do I implement this, right? I don't know how to, we've never implemented a project like this before. And so what does that look like? And I think those things impact as well.
Andy, the other thing the sponsor has to do is manage expectations because,
Right.
Stress and frustration is caused by the gap between your expectations and reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't have proper expectations, and let's just say your first initiative fails,
Right.
most people are going to say, well, we're not going to do that again.
Right.
And what they need to realize is innovative companies fail. So failure is a badge of honor, but you don't want to purposely fail. So that's why you need to take the baby steps to say, okay, low-hanging fruit, what are the easy things to implement? And then
Right.
after you have some wins and some successes, then you can start taking on the more challenging aspects of
Right.
AI.
Yeah.
The wonder I had is budget. And if you look at budget cycles, like a lot of organizations are on like an annual budget cycle.
Right.
So it could take a whole year before you could allocate the budget to do this. And maybe it would be easier than, but
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, or are we in the budget cycle of a year?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of organizations won't be able to put this in the budget
Right.
until the next budget cycle.
Yeah, and I think there's probably aspects of these kinds of projects where companies that want to do it, organizations that feel it's important, will figure out ways of saying, okay, well we can find X amount of dollars to start playing with some things and to start investigating. I think other organizations that don't want to do it can use budget as an excuse not to do it, right? Oh, we don't have the resources, we can't invest in that right now, so we're not going to do anything. But we also know that if they're not doing anything and they're pushing it off more and more and more, they're falling further and further behind. So how do we effectively educate those organizations to be like, you really have to think about investing in this. It is important because a year from now, when your next budget planning goes on and you're willing to put some money towards it, you're going to be a year behind, and probably more given the velocity at which it's moving, you know.
So what I've been reading about are the companies now that are laying people off, not because of AI, but because of AI. So what they're trying to do is create that budget. And one way to create the budget is get rid of some of the people so we can save the money in order to be able to invest in AI. All
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear some of the reasoning or lack thereof behind some of it, especially with these really big, you know, multi-thousand layoff kind of situations. And I think, you know, AI is, in some ways, it's a convenient excuse because it's kind of the, you know, the reason du jour, but maybe, you know, and likely there's some relationship, but to what extent, it's hard to know exactly.
Yeah, one way to tackle the resistance to budget allocation is, it's just like in marketing, you know, we'll go to a company and say, okay, we do a needs assessment, this is what you need. And very commonly I'll say, okay, well, you probably need 40 hours a month, 10 hours a week of marketing. And then when they look at what that is per month, they're like, oh, we don't have the budget for it. So what we do is we'll say, okay, instead of 40 hours, let's do 20. And usually they can find that because they know they need to start, right? Because it's just like this, you know, you could keep saying, oh, we don't have the budget, we don't have the budget, we don't have the budget. And then it's 5 years and you're still not doing marketing or you're still not doing AI.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can just, you know, get that budget so that it's, you know, maybe there's a slush fund or something, there's some money, you know, that can lay somebody off, you know, to at least get started. That's the most important thing.
Right.
Is to get started.
Yeah, I mean, just, yeah, do something.
Yeah.
Don't do nothing, right?
Well,
just
that
do
sounds
something.
bad too. do something that's part of the roadmap.
Yeah, I mean, get started. I mean, I think that's
Start
the core message. Yeah,
Create a
Get the
roadmap.
roadmap.
create a
Start
roadmap.
the roadmap.
No,
Yeah.
get one.
Yeah. Start getting one.
Start, yeah. And we know that from a non-person perspective, right? We've got all the technology pieces, so the licensing and the infrastructure and whatever. You know, there's the external support, like consultants and contractors. There's, you know, whatever the internal cost is of the development time. Training is a big part of it. Materials and all that kind of stuff. And then if there's some kind of contingency, right? So we all know that the numbers aren't necessarily going to be exactly what we want them to be. So we have to think about the resource planning of this. And then, you know, in the 90-day launch plan, you know, and this might be scaled up or down depending upon what you're trying to do. So kind of broken into 3 buckets. There's the foundation bucket where you get started. There's the deployment bucket where you're starting to kind of execute. And then you've got kind of this, you know, the build, and then you've got the deploy. So you've got the foundation, which is, you know, you're forming the team, you're kicking off the project, you're establishing things like vision. It's you know, finalizing the requirements. It's getting figuring out what the tools are going to be. So here are you know, we're using these tools, these platforms, so forth. We've got a project plan. So we're laying the foundation, right? We're starting out, we're getting all the pieces in place to then be able to actually build. So then it's, okay, we're going to develop a solution. Typically we're developing it in some kind of environment that we can test, you know, what we're doing, and it isn't, you know, available to everyone yet. So we're doing some testing. We're creating whatever training materials and communication that we need for this project. We're, you know, going to soft launch with some friendly adopters, right? Put it in the hands of some users and let them try it and understand how it's going to work. We're going to gather some feedback. We're going to document some process. So we're kind of building this out, right? And we're getting it to the point where then we can launch it and push it out into a greater number of people. So when we're deploying it in the third phase, we're dealing with a full launch. We're pushing it into the hands of every user. We're going to monitor the usage of it and the performance because we're gathering metrics along the way to kind of measure how this is going. We need to provide support, right? So people are going to have questions and we have to be able to figure out, okay, how do we answer these questions in an effective way and make sure they're using the tools appropriately. We want to be able to fix problems and iterate on, okay, we need to tweak this, or we got the wrong answer out of whatever our prompt was or whatever the content was. We got to go back and tweak that. Because we know that at scale, we're going to see issues that we didn't necessarily see when we deployed it to just one or two people. So we're going to have edge cases and just things that come up that we have to, we've got to address this in a different way. And then we're going to document our lessons learned, right? And figure out, okay, what went well through this whole process. And again, this is something that we could, this might be a 30-day process where we say, hey, we're going to break this down into, weeks, or every 10 days we're going to say, okay, we're going to do some initial foundation laying, and over the next week we're going to start building, and that's going to take a week, and then we're going to deploy, and that's going to take a week. So you have to scale it according to whatever the particular initiative is, right? It's not everyone's going to be a 90-day plan, but thinking about it in the context of build the foundation, create whatever it is you're creating, right? So it's building the product, so to speak, and then deploying it. So thinking about it kind of in that structure, I think is helpful. Again, this is pretty standard software kinds of process, but I think it aligns well with when we're developing AI types of solutions because we're doing very similar kinds of things. Defining what our risk mitigation plan is, right? We've talked about poor data as an example. So, okay, well, if we've identified data as an issue, then we know in our foundation laying we need to address that issue. If we're going to continue on with this project, we need to spend some amount of time in the first portion of our project addressing the data issues and fixing those to the point where we feel like we can now use this data going forward to actually build out whatever our product is. So that's one risk. Another is user resistance, right? So we know all the cultural conversations around this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it and this is how it aligns to our vision. But we still know that because there's people involved, we're going to have people that aren't going to like what we're doing. They're going to push back. There's going to be potentially some challenges. So thinking about how we invest in people, invest in communication, invest in training to make sure that we're setting everyone up for success as much as possible within the context of using these tools, right? It's about communicating the benefits and making sure that we are hearing and listening to whatever the feedback is and looking at ways of addressing that. That's something that's happening kind of throughout the process, right? Especially as we get into that broader deployment, right? As we're laying foundation and as we're building, we're kind of in a bubble to a degree. And now as we start rolling something out more broadly and people are seeing it for the first time, hopefully they're not hearing about it for the first time, but they're seeing it for the first time. How do we address whatever issues come up and make sure that we're hearing what people are saying, but we don't necessarily want someone to just torpedo the entire project. So thinking about success metrics. So here, defining what is success, and here are some examples of that in some different buckets, right? So we've got leading metrics that might be weekly. So user adoption rate. So just what percentage of people in the organization are using the tool on a regular cadence, whatever that is. Now, the tool might only require a once a week thing, or it might require a daily thing. It just depends on what you're building. Especially as this is being rolled out, how many people are using it, right? So that's one kind of easy number to gather. And then that might be more specifically then, how much are they using it? So there's, yeah, we're using it, but now how much are we using it? Are they using it to the extent where you would expect them to? So if they're developing content, or they're using it for scheduling, or they're using it for workflows, whatever it is, they're using it a certain amount of time per week, per day, whatever it might be, and being able to capture that information as well. Again, some of that could be systemic. There are ways of doing that. Probably the best way to do it is to have conversations, right? So have a regular time that you're connecting with end users, and you're engaging in conversation around understanding, what the cadence is of their use. So doing that every week is going to help, kind of capture that initial engagement with the tool. And then we're, on a monthly basis, being able to understand, well, what are the business outcomes around maybe cost savings? So if we're doing this for efficiency, and we're identifying, okay, people are using this on a regular basis, and theoretically each iteration of that is going to save a certain amount of time, let's say. Let's project out what we think that savings is going to be in work time, in hard dollars, whatever we want to define cost savings to be. What does that look like? And then what is the equivalent time saving? So if we're going for efficiency, how much time are we actually saving using this tool on a monthly basis? So we have these monthly metrics that we're capturing. And then quarterly, more long-term, we're saying, okay, well, what's the ROI, right? So what is our ROI percentage that we're looking at, through what we've measured monthly and weekly? And then what are the capabilities that we've now unlocked with these tools? So theoretically, we've created efficiency. We've allowed people to maybe spend time on things that they normally wouldn't be spending time on, or they can spend more time doing greater value activities. So what kinds of capabilities now that we've provided this tool, what have we unlocked for that set of people? You may think of other ones, right? There may be other kind of organizational metrics that you want to incorporate into something like this. I think you don't want to overwhelm people with, okay, we're going to capture these 50 metrics, and it's like, okay, what does this mean? You want to keep it relatively simple to make sure it's easy to A, capture, and B, report out. But think about metrics certainly as well in the context of the overall organization and how you might measure and how you define success. And then when we think about kind of the evolution, this is really kind of this feedback. And it's something that we know we're going to learn along the way as we roll something out. So it's how do we capture some of that stuff, right? So being able to have some retrospectives and connecting with the team and getting feedback on a regular basis. Presenting, kind of status and updates, especially if we want to share something with the broader leadership team or with other constituencies within the organization. Being able to say, hey, here's where we're at, here's how we've progressed, here's what our successes are, et cetera. And then I think there's the kind of that strategic assessment of saying, okay, we've run this project, we've gotten some output. Now, how are we aligning? How is the outcome of this now aligned to what our strategy is, what we projected it to be initially? Some of that's going to go on as part of your weekly and monthly conversations, but having something where you're really spending time specifically on aligning that and pushing that, matching it up against what we had originally conceived of in terms of our strategy and our vision. So those things I think are important to do on a regular basis, because that's going to then inform what the next project is, right? So as you've gone through a project and you've gathered feedback, and now all that feedback is going to flow into what comes next in terms of whatever the next item on the list is to be able to implement. The other thing to keep in mind too is that you could certainly make these, not necessarily parallel, because you don't want to have too many things running at the same time, but you may say, hey, we're going to get through initiative, the first 60 days of initiative number 1, and then we're going to kick off initiative number 2 while we're scaling the first one, right? That all depends on capacity, on resources, and all of those things, ultimately. All right, let's take 5 minutes. So to kind of finish up on here, one of the things, if we look at kind of this quick wins timeline, what is kind of a quick win mean in some of these different buckets? So again, looking at the 90-day timeline here. So over the first 30 days, having a solution that's available and testing, right? You've built something, and maybe you're kind of testing it, and you're starting to play with it a little bit. You've mapped kind of your process state, so you kind of know where AI fits. I think that's another aspect of, when you're implementing a project, kind of knowing, you have your current state of how things work today in some process. And then you have a future state of what that might look like with AI. So incorporating kind of a flow diagram or a description of the process kind of with AI in the mix. And then having starting some training and getting people at least understanding what AI is and how it can benefit, right? I think those can be some kind of quick wins. As we get into, next stages, maybe there's an autonomous process that's running, right? Where you've got, you're getting still humans kind of part of that loop, but you've got some automation that's happening to try to free up some time. You're able to measure that time again and start collecting those metrics. And also being able to start telling the story. I think telling stories is important about how AI is impacting the organization in positive ways, hopefully, right? So being able to tell some stories within that, the next bucket. And then, at the end of the process, okay, we've met all the success criteria. We've documented the results and the learnings. We've demonstrated ROI. So all of those things I think are good ways of validating kind of success in these different buckets. So it isn't waiting till the very end and saying, was this successful or not? I think you want to look at those things along the way and not just at one point at the very end of the process. So kind of be evaluating that kind of as you go. So in terms of incorporating change management, right, that's going to be throughout this process. So this might be a multi-month process in this example, but it's about awareness. Why do we have to change, right? Why is this? Why are we doing this thing? And why is this change, coming down the road? Addressing the desire, what's in it for me, right? Providing information about how do I change, right? A lot of people don't necessarily understand, what that means. How are they going to be adjusting to whatever this new reality is? And then removing barriers to actually changing, whether it's providing tools and coaching users through the process. And then how do you reinforce that kind of throughout this process? So like we said, the change management piece and the communication is an ongoing process. There are kind of going to be different elements, and we know that different people are going to be at different stages along the process. Some people are going to be very willing to accept change, others not so much. So we have to be able to coach them along the way and make sure we're communicating well through that process. When we're going to scale, so this is about going from a test, just from a few users, now we want to kind of roll this out. And how do we know when it's the right time to roll something out and to scale it? So there's some different criteria that we can use for this. One is if we're just seeing tremendous ROI, right? The ROI is just kind of blown out of the water. It's doing really well. That's one way of measuring, right? We're exceeding expectations significantly. We're getting strong user adoption. So within the context of our initial user group, we're seeing people use it consistently, performing all the actions, right? We know that it's being accepted within that smaller group, so how do we then scale it? We know that there's stability, right? So not only is it available and people are using it, but also we're getting the results that we want out of it. There isn't a lot of constant, we're seeing, the output isn't good, or we need to change our prompts. We're seeing consistency in the way that the AI is performing. And so that's another great indicator. And then we've documented everything, right? So we've got good documentation on how the process works, how we're troubleshooting and supporting users, whatever the lessons learned are. We've captured a lot of information. So if we have 3 out of 4 of these, then we're good to start rolling it out, to start doing a broader push to more of the organization. If not, then we probably need to be in the pilot mode a little bit longer, continuing to iterate, make whatever tweaks are needed, et cetera, get people on board. So, and there are some different ways of scaling, right? So there's horizontal versus vertical versus adjacent. Horizontal might be, hey, we're gonna just take whatever we have and roll it out across all the teams, across the entire organization. It might be we're gonna go deeper, right? So we're gonna take the same user group and now we're gonna add more functionality and we're gonna go deeper in that particular area. We're gonna create more capabilities within whatever our solution is. Or we're gonna go adjacent where we've solved a particular problem and now we're gonna look at adjacent problems to apply the same set of technologies and same core ideas. So typically when we think about scaling broadly, we're talking about horizontal. We're talking about taking a solution and pushing it out to the rest of the organization. But depending upon what you're addressing and the problem that's being solved, the vertical scaling might be more appropriate to say, hey, we're gonna start with something basic and we're gonna then add capability and then maybe we go more horizontal after that, right? We take then that deeper solution and then push that out more broadly. So it kind of depends on the particular problem that you're trying to solve. But normally I'd say horizontal is the way you're gonna approach it. So you're gonna have some checks around the roadmap quality, right? So in each of these areas, you want to look at where, is my roadmap, so to speak, complete? And if it addresses all of these areas, then you've got a complete roadmap at this point, right? So you've got alignment. We've talked a lot about alignment, where the vision is supported. The vision supports the mission. We've talked about advancing strategic objectives. We've identified the success metrics. The resources are realistic, right? We've allocated dollars and people. The timeline is achievable, whatever that is, 30 days, 90 days, 2 months, 6 months, whatever it is. We've identified any dependencies in that timeline, so we know that, step X has to happen before step Y does, and so we've accounted for whatever the dependencies are. We know there are going to be potential delays, so have we built in some buffer time when we're kind of laying out what this plan is. And we've created milestones that are realistic, right? Not something that's just aspirational. Again, the metrics are clearly defined. So we know what success looks like because we defined those ahead of time as part of building our foundation. So we know what we are expecting in terms of measuring and capturing data. And that there is someone assigned, right? There are responsible parties for collecting and aggregating and reporting out that data. So if any of these are no, right, then that's a gap, right? We need to identify that gap, and then we need to address it. Make sure that we're thinking through how we close that in some way. Likewise with these, we've identified risks. So we've documented top 3 to 5 risks with particular mitigation plans. Again, if maybe data isn't good, how we're addressing it. We don't have the right skills, how are we addressing it? Having contingency plans, so what happens if something goes wrong? Is the team committed? I think this is especially important because the team itself that's going to be implementing this has to be on board, right? So we have to make sure that people are ready and willing to jump in, spend time, use a portion of their day-to-day work to implement and work on this. Likewise, has leadership endorsed it, right? So leadership is on board. Leadership is shouting from the rooftops, this is a great thing, we're doing this, right? We've got budget, we've got resources, we've removed roadblocks from being able to implement something. And then finally, are we enabling learning, right? We've talked about retrospectives, we've talked about training, we've talked about reviews, making sure that all those are accounted for in the roadmap as part of a schedule so that we're not just doing something and not going back and learning from it. So making sure that we're continually feeding back and understanding, how things have gone. So if all 8 of those, right, if we believe all 8 of those are good and solid, then we've got a good roadmap, right? That those are defining what our roadmap looks like. So we're building foundation, right? We spent the first 8 weeks getting a foundational knowledge of various aspects of AI. We're defining strategy, right? The strategy is going to define what we're going to implement. So we want to have that strategy in alignment. We want to have good pilots that are going to lead to successful scale. We know that the plan is going to change, right? The roadmap is as we say, it's a living document. It's dynamic. It's something that we're starting with what we know today, but we're going to learn along the way. So we want to make sure we're updating and tweaking that roadmap as we go, knowing that it's going to change. And all of us here, right, are resources for one another. So know that you can always reach out to me with questions, and I hope you can reach out to one another with questions if you're thinking about things. Because there's a lot to know, there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to understand, and nobody knows everything. But maybe together we can figure some things out. The quote I leave you with is from Alan Kay, who was a computer scientist. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. So that's what you're going to do.
Yes.
And with that, I will show you. So I will send you this this link. So I've put together this roadmap tool that basically, when you log into it, you'll have the ability to upload your assessment that you went through, the PDF of the assessment. And what that will do is that will load in some information. So it'll read in your organizational profile, just kind of basic size, industry, name, that kind of stuff. And then it's going to read in your assessment data and give you the ability to kind of tweak these maturity scores at a high level. So looking at strategy, people, data, infrastructure, and adoption. So you can kind of tweak those scores based on your kind of understanding. And then there's a strategic context step here where you're kind of defining, what's driving your strategy. You want to create value, you're trying to impact stakeholders, you're trying to improve competitive position. And then what's your focus? Generative AI, predictive AI, or maybe a hybrid of them. Kind of what's your implementation preference is, build versus buy. So, you're going to do some custom development versus you want to buy off the shelf, or maybe a hybrid. What's your budget range? So, low to high. If you want to pay, if you're going to put 500 grand into it, good, fantastic. But if you want to put, 20 grand or 5 or whatever the number is, right? So having a number. And then defining what the key constraints and risks are. So again, some of this is coming from the assessment, but also, you can go ahead and modify some of these things and add to it if you want to. And then defining your vision and goals. So kind of what are your primary business objectives for this initiative, which again might be establishing strategy, building awareness. You want to, kind of what are the various goals that you're trying to implement here. Then you can kind of fill in some details here around your data strategy and readiness, governance and risk, people and culture, technology and infrastructure. So just providing some greater kind of detail in those areas. And then you can add use cases. So these use cases, basically you give it a name and then kind of define your, what you think the impact and the feasibility are for it to create a set of potential use cases. And then when you generate the roadmap, then it'll come back in a little bit with a starting point for you to give you kind of a basic implementation summary. And then it gives you the ability to then create some kind of partnership documents to go along with it. We'll let this run for a minute. So it's just a way of helping you kind of get started with the process. It'll generate a PDF, it'll generate a PowerPoint kind of overview presentation, it'll generate an Excel spreadsheet with kind of at least some basic structure for budget. And again, it's very much a work in progress, so there'll be some tweaks along the way.
Is our data being used to help train your?
That's the right question to ask. That's right. That's right. Actually, hopefully I can show you what the output's going to be if my computer cooperates. So the idea then is to spend some time over the next week thinking about your roadmap, come up with some basic information and structure. And next week, in our final week, I want to spend some time walking through your roadmaps and having a conversation around what it looks like. What does it look like for you to get started, and what does it look like for you to start implementing? And maybe this will come back and I can show you some more details on it.
Andy, I know one of the priorities for me is around developing a good policy for AI usage
Uh-huh.
and some guidelines for that.
Yep.
as you've been talking about the roadmap, is this a potential project in the roadmap? Or is this something that has to be done prior to setting up some of the projects that would be in, like a pilot, that kind of thing?
Yeah, typically you would want to have your use policy kind of defined first.
That's what I was guessing.
So I think you'd want to spend some time, and this is kind of what you get when you're done. So there's kind of a bit of a summary. There's so I've got a PDF here that it generates with various pieces of information. Right now, this is generating a PDF with everything, but I'll probably generate a Word doc as well, so you can go in and more easily just edit it and make changes to it. So there's a variety of information in here that at least that's designed to give you a starting point to kind of work with, and then from there it's kind of make it your own. But so under this documents here, so there are some ancillary documents like an AI use policy that you can generate,
Okay.
along with project charters, implementation plans, etc. This gives you, again, just kind of a high level. So again, just giving you some starting points is the goal with this. So I'll send out the link, and then you can kind of play with it and let me know how it's working, if you have challenges. But yeah, so we'll spend time next week going through more detail of your roadmaps and answering questions and just having kind of a working session to some degree.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you.